We've got a lot to cover this morning. So thank you for being on the call. I know it's the middle of summer. There's two times of the year that I'm concerned about agents and their business, and it's usually July and December. For whatever reason, I think we're in the height of vacations in July, and then December is just full of fun activities. So appreciate you being here, and this is when I think it proves how serious you are about the business. So good on you. All right, Haley, I appreciate you turning the video on. That's awesome. Joyce, you had yours on. I don't know what's going on. It's okay. All right, there we go. Listen. I'm socially needy, and so I like to see faces because I hate talking to a screen. When I do my personality tests, I think I've said this before. My two predominant traits, and they're almost equal. The number one is expressive, and the second one is an analytical. And the joke with that, of course, and maybe, the funny jokes are the ones that are like, yeah, it's actually close to the truth. Yes. I will find out why I'm wrong, and then I will have to tell people over and over again, because I'm an expressive, why I'm right. So bless you all for tolerating me. All right, let's get underway. Let's start really quickly. Can you realize it's been almost 3 weeks since we've met? So I'm really hopeful that, tell James to get on the call. James, you're late. I can see him on Heidi's screen. Wins or interesting contract or client issues. Somebody share with me something. Come on. Or we'll just sit here in awkward silence until somebody says something.
Share one.
Okay, go, Parker.
So I was, sorry, something's in my throat. So I was negotiating a deal. I was talking to Savannah about this the other day. That took almost a week and a half to negotiate. I was representing the seller. The buyer's husband had passed away. She wanted to sell the home, but when an offer actually came across the table, she got really sad and wanted to pull back. And initially the seller's agent was like, "No, we're just not going to do it." And I'm like, "Hey, hold on. Let's talk a little. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what's important to your seller. Let's see if I can work it out with my buyer." Going back and forth anyway, over about a week, we were able to come to terms, and she signed the paperwork, and it was fine. But it was a high stress situation from the emotional point of the sellers, and being able to, and also for my buyers who have 5 kids, they want to get out of their neighborhood because they got like a crazy neighbor. So it was like a whole thing. Anyway, the point of that was to say, it's amazing what you can do with just a little bit of communication. I talk to my agents on my team, and oftentimes they're like, "Boy, all I did was ask this seller's agent what's important to the seller other than price." And all of a sudden, the guy touted off 10 minutes of speech about what's most important, giving me extreme leverage in my ability to negotiate over multiple offers. So I think just to the point of keeping communication going and being relaxed, one of the comments from the seller's agent was, you're so chill in this process. You're so relaxed. Thanks for being so patient. And I just said, "Yeah, dude, we just want to put a deal together." So anyway, that it can go a long way with just a little bit of effort and setting the correct expectations.
So thank you for sharing that, Parker. And you know what? It's a great reminder. Sometimes.
Is Lola off this morning?
Oh, well, mute whoever that was. Sometimes in our business, we get so focused sometimes on the systems and the churning of the wheels and things like that, that sometimes we get in our own way. So your story is a perfect example of that. Sometimes it's just like, well, crap, they said no, we're going to move on, find another property. We actually stop being as human as maybe we could be. And that's not just some altruistic thing like, hey, I mean, there is some altruism there. We need to be human, right? It makes our job meaningful. But sometimes that is the very thing that is needed, like you just demonstrated. Just, hey, what's going on here? And start asking some questions, have some genuine concern, which opens the door for opportunities, perhaps, not always, but perhaps to keep the deal on track. That's a tough thing. somebody losing their spouse, tied up with memories. I mean, how many of you have this experience? It doesn't even have to be with a death. It's like a healthy family, and they get close to selling the house, and it's like, wait a minute, we had 5 of our children here, and there's so many memories, and you can. I've seen both ends of the spectrum. Agents like, well, they just need to get over it. Yeah, that's going to be helpful. It's like my favorite phrase that is so effective. If you don't have this in your repertoire, please write it down, practice it, and use this one. You need to calm down. Come on. Has that ever worked? Ever? In relationships, in business? It always has the opposite effect, right? So, of course, I'm joking when I say that. I think our job is to, we say this so much sometimes, I think it becomes white noise. We really need to get way, way, way better about asking questions. And I don't mean canned ones. I mean ones that are like kind of heartfelt, authentic, like, hey, we just take a pause here a minute. Sorry to hear you're going through that with your seller. Is there anything we can do? Is there any, timeline of what are the opportunities to keep this deal on track? I mean, I want to be sensitive to your seller too, but obviously my buyer's interested and they've got some emotions, they're envisioning them, right? And all of a sudden you're starting to share the emotions on your side. And it just makes it more collaborative versus everybody digging in their heels, getting entrenched and making a deal go away. And you get to start over with a buyer all over again, showing houses and putting it under contract and negotiating again. So wouldn't it be worthwhile to try and keep the current deal on track?
Matt, to your point, after 5 days of negotiating different points where she said, this is the problem, this is the problem, what really it came down to was she planted a tree with her husband when they first bought the home. She was the only owner. And she didn't want that tree to be taken down. That was the big deal. And so it was like, no problem. Here's a letter from my buyers telling you they're never going to chop that tree down. And that
I don't know how that's enforced. I mean, the tree police, the arborists, I don't know. But yeah, you're addressing the issue, whether it's completely legal, contractual, but what it shows is you're addressing her emotional issues. So good job. All right. Thanks for sharing that. All right, I'm going to pull up here's what I want to cover today. So if you're ready to take notes, we're going to cover a few sections in the REPC, and they're ones that come up. They're not the boring, mundane. These are the ones where it starts to get a little juicy. And I say that with a little bit of tongue in cheek. If we do it right, they shouldn't be issues, but they seem to be ones that are front and center in most of the deals when things tend to get a little screwy or completely sideways. So we're going to start with section 9. Now, without looking at your REPC, what is section 9? Come on. You can unmute because I'm looking. The only one unmuted is Tammy. Wow. You guys are horrible Zoom partners. I don't see any dogs running around in the background. I don't see any children. So, I don't. Unmute. Come on.
Isn't it the additional addendums?
Yes. Let me say it a different way. Other parts of the offer, right? And I'm saying that intentionally because sometimes people look at it almost like they go to a Chinese restaurant and say, well, I want some lo mein and I want some, I'm trying to think of another Chinese food, some rice, right? That's not the way offers work. When it's declared in section 9, it becomes part of the offer. We're going to spend a minute on that. Section 14, the complete contract. Section 16 and 17, and I'd highly recommend anytime you talk about section 16, you immediately follow up with section 17. It's more effective. It kind of shows how impactful certain decisions are going to be. And then the last one is section 18. And actually, I'm going to share my screen here. Let's actually start with section 18 because it's kind of front and center in so many things that we do. So, share. All right, y'all seeing that okay? Silence is deafening.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. You know, I need to visit you again because I'm missing some M&Ms, you know. If you don't
Yeah.
know,
Oh,
Melissa Montgomery has the best name and the best shtick for marketing. She just hands people M&Ms, and it's Melissa Montgomery. So awesome. Okay, section 18. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so that everybody can completely see that. Okay, right? All right. So this is super important. This is where, oh, you know what? Before I do that, really quick, I had two other things. I apologize. I wanted to show you this. This is the FedWatch tool that I showed last time. And I just want to show you when we were on our contract call this is a copy of the video from June 23rd. And notice, if you remember, right here is when the Fed meets next, July 30th, not too far off. And there was a 77% probability that we would stay, interest rates would stay where they are, meaning the Fed funds rate, which has a carryover effect significantly to mortgage rates. So 77%. I did it again this morning. This is live. It's now 95% that rates are going to stay the same come July 30th. So good intelligence for you to know. And I always like to look at least to the following meeting, which is September 17th. And there's a 65% chance that we will drop a quarter point. I really don't like going beyond 3 months. It looks like all the way through the October meeting, there's about basically until December, we're going to be a quarter point drop. That's as good as we're going to get, right? And that's my confidence level is going out 3 meetings. We could speculate that December 10th, there's a 95% chance that we get another drop, another quarter point drop. But that's good information. Nod your head if you agree that's good information. Otherwise, I'm assuming you're all asleep. Okay. And then the other stat that I wanted to show you, I always get excited when we turn over 3 months because that means that UtahRealEstate.com is going to update their home sales graph. And I screened off inventory just so this would stay clean. I wanted to show you this, right?
hey, Matt, we can't see what you're showing us right
now. Thank you.
Welcome.
So fun. All right. Thank you, Savannah.
Welcome.
Yeah, now you should see it. Blue line is the median sales price going all the way back to first quarter of 2018. Black line is the number of homes sold. So 2 key pieces of data. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if I take, this is, if you hover over the bullet points, right, and this is for the entire state, if you go back 4 quarters, so we're currently at 512,000 is the median sales price. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 507, that second quarter of 2024. Can I just show you something simple you should be doing? If you bring up a calculator, I have one on my desk. If you take 507 divided by 512, right? That's 99%. That means in 1 year, median sales price has gone up 1%. Now, not going to spend time on this. Is that a good stat to be able to share with your buyers? We have plateaued. It's a great time to buy because it will not stay down forever. And in fact, if you look at, 500 to 512, it's a little over 2% in 1 quarter that jumped up. Okay. Now, the other thing is, let's go a little more significant on the data. You go back 2 full years, 490 divided by the current 512. And it is 4.3%. 4.3 divided by 2 years means over the past 2 years, we're appreciating at 2%. Now, I know that's totally like nerd data information, but can all of you do that? Can all of you remember how to do that? Because then when somebody asks you, how's the market doing? It's like, well, you know what? It's always a little bit of a mixed bag. Let me share with you a few things I was just recently researching, right? Because you're all committed now to every Monday going in and sharpening the saw and knowing your market, right? Now, the only other thing I'm going to share with this is look at what sales have done all the way. If I was to put a line through the data points here for homes sold, is the momentum picking up? If you go back 5, 6 years, no. I mean, look at this, 16,856 in 2020. And the most recent quarter, we did 10,789. Now, that's not like anything to scare people with, but if I have a seller and we're talking about pricing, you bet your butt I'm going to sit here and talk about 2 data points. We're not seeing great price appreciation, so we need to be priced right. And oh, by the way, since, if we were to sit here and say, okay, 10,789 divided by 16,856, we're down a third from what we were a few years ago on actual homes sold, and pricing hasn't increased. Go figure. Lower demand, pricing doesn't go up. We all know supply demand, right?
Now, what's the criteria you used in creating this? I may have missed that.
Yeah, you can see it over here, Parker.
Okay.
So it defaults to back 5 years. So I went 8 years so we could get COVID in there, or I went back to 2018 so we could see pre-COVID, right? And then all I do is say the 2 graphs I want are sold price and home sold. I could add listed on there, but it makes for a messy graph for what we're doing. And then just make sure you do median. Don't do average. Average has skewed data that's not helpful. You always want to use median wherever possible. Okay. So anyway, there's the stat nerd part of it. So remember, Fed watch, we're going to stay where we are on rates, probably at least until, October, the end of October. So that's good for a buyer to know. If you're waiting on the fence, but you got to be buying a house, it's not going to improve anytime soon. It's going to stay stagnant. And then, of course, our stat, which is helpful for buyers to be like, this is a great time because this means sellers are still motivated to do concessions. There's not a lot of movement on price, and there's less homes being sold than just a few years ago. And if we're talking to sellers, great data, same data, to show them you need to be realistic on your pricing. We're not hockey sticking up on the median sales price, so the curve isn't going to catch you, right? It's going to stay relatively stagnant. Okay? All right. Let's jump over to the REPC. All right, section 18. This is where we went before I forgot. I forgot to give you statistical data. Parker, do me a favor. Just read section 18 out loud for me really quickly.
Sure. Notices. Except as provided in section 23, all notices required under the REPC must be A, in writing, B, signed by the buyer or seller giving notice, and C, received by the buyer or the seller or their respective agent or by the brokerage firm representing the buyer or seller no later than the applicable date referenced in the REPC.
Yep. When I do my highlighting, I go through and do just simple things like this. So when I'm talking to a client, I hit the key points. So it makes sure it gets driven home in their brain, and it helps me with my talking points. Like, listen, when we come to notices, or when I'm dealing with an agent on the other side, because trust me, a lot of other agents and brokers don't understand this. You get things like, well, I sent a text, I sent an email. Well, that's cute, but that's not what is specifically required in the contract. And let me connect the dot here really quickly. There's a term in contract law, which is the 4 corners of the contract. If it is specific in the contract, then anything else that is ambiguous falls victim to what is specific. So if there's specific writing in here, that's what you're going to be held to, right? And it will wipe out other things. I don't know, like a text or an email. That's not what the requires specifically requires. It requires A, it be in writing, B, it needs to be signed by whoever is giving the notice, and C, it must be received by who? Either the other party or their agent or their brokerage. So I always tell people, if you're giving critical notice, I would do it to both the agent and their broker, just so that there's no question as to whether they got the notice. Because even if the agent said, oh, well, you sent it to the wrong email address, that has happened in the past, but it's pretty low probability that you're going to get 2 email addresses wrong. And so the broker got it and you still jumped the hurdle. Does that make sense? So error on the side of caution, and send to more people rather than less.
So just for the sake of eliminating ambiguity, can you define received?
Yes. Good question. What does it mean to be? Anybody want to take an attempt at that? What does it mean to be received? Nobody wants to take that one. Come on, Daryl. You're an old veteran in this. What does it mean to be received?
My phone's ringing.
Oh, would a fax work? Would an email work? The
Would
short
it
answer
work
is yes.
oh, yes, I was gonna say, because when it's a fax or an email, do you have to flag that it's been opened or received, or can it just be that you show proof that it was sent?
Proof that it was sent. Good question, Melissa,
Okay.
because your job isn't to represent the other side. Your job is to do what your side is required to in the contract. So one, you did get it in writing. You did have your client sign it, and then you sent it. Think like you put it in the mail and the post office delivered it, right? They have received it. It's in their mailbox. Whether they choose to open it or not is on them. But what you absolutely want to do, I'm going to use the archaic first. If you're still using faxes, make sure you get the fax confirmation sheet that showed that the two fax machines connected and your transmission went through. And then, like I said, with an email, you've got a copy of who you sent it to. And usually if it is a bad email address, it will bounce back and you'll get notification. And that's why I say send to both the agent and to the broker. Okay. All right. So section 18, super important, anything we do. By the way, what requires notice? What are some of the things that require notice?
Any addendums,
Okay.
cancellations?
Earnest
That's a
money?
big one. What's
Earnest
that?
money?
Earnest money? So let's stop on that one for a minute, Savannah, because I love the fact that you brought that up. Do you have an obligation to tell the other side we got earnest money?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have any confusion on that, go read the DRE newsletter from, I think, 2 times ago, and they came out very strong on that, saying both parties, buyer and seller agent, have a responsibility to make sure that earnest money is received and communicated that it has been received. That falls under the category of notice. So, all right, let's jump back up to section 9. All right. I love this one because it seems so simple, right? And yet people screw it up all the time. And I promise you, I'm not making this up. I get this all the time. It goes something like this. I'll get a call from one of our agents and it's like, hey, we sent over an offer, and I'm going to use the FHA as an example, right? So the seller on the MLS doesn't have that they're accepting FHA loans, okay? Right? You can put in their type of financing, cash, conventional, blah, blah, blah. And they didn't put FHA. Well, that doesn't mean you can't send over an offer with FHA, because they can still accept it. And we're going to come to why that is true here when we go to section 14. But so you send over the offer, and let's say not only do you have the FHA addendum, but you have a closing cost addendum and subject to sell of the buyer's residence, right? So this is a juicy one, a lot of moving parts. And the seller sends it back, and they sign the REPC, and they say accepted. And the FHA addendum, they say rejected. And the other two we mentioned, they sign as accepted. What is the status of our offer?
Canceled.
Rejected, canceled.
Say it again, Parker.
Canceled. It's not applicable. If the FHA was attached as part of the original offer, then if one thing is rejected, all is rejected.
Thank you. That was the line I was looking for. If you reject one part, you have rejected it all. I don't know how people get this wrong, right? They're like, well, we like those other 2 addenda, but we just don't want to do FHA financing. Now, how should they have handled it? How should the seller have handled it?
Counteroffer.
Counteroffer, right? Addendum 1 to be removed from the contract. It could be as simple as that. That is your counteroffer. That means you accepted the REPC and addendum 2 and addendum 3, right? The closing cost addendum and the subject to sell addendum. That's the proper way to do it. And you actually have a valid enforceable contract. You cannot Chinese menu an offer. right? Think back to your pre-licensing days. This like was, I don't know, if you went to string them, this was beat in your head, which was anything that comes in section 9 is like glued together, right? Like with super glue, it cannot be separated. You either accept it all, you either reject it all, or you counter it all. There's no option for, I like this part, but not that part, and this part, and not that part. And that's what we're doing. That is 100% unenforceable. Okay.
Matt,
Now,
I kind of like to look at it like if you were to accept it, but you cross out the price and write in a different price than initial it, and think you have a deal.
oh, James, I'm so glad you brought that up. One of my big pet peeves, and our company has gotten really good on this based on our office managers and TCs being our polite and yet dutiful enforcers. The DRE has a rule, right, in the thou shalt not for a licensee. Thou shalt not strike out, white out, or cause to be modified an offer, right? If you're going to do it in an official counteroffer. To your point, James, you can't just strike out in section 2. Well, we didn't like the price, so we're just going to change it right here, and strike out 450,000 and put 425,000. I hope I don't even have to go why, but it's like, who struck it out at what time? Was there a meeting of the minds? I mean, this is part of the reason why they say you shall not, as a licensee, do that. Okay. So if you do happen to get a notice from one of our office managers going, hey, notice you wrote some stuff in the margins. How about we get that into an addendum or a counteroffer? That's exactly why they're doing it. Okay. All right. Now, here's a question. So these are all addenda. What could you put in the other category? Are there any boundaries? Everybody's like, it's a setup. Don't answer him.
If it's not an addendum, don't put it in there.
It's not an addendum. Don't put it there. Okay.
Well, I don't know about that, because you could ask for a survey.
You could also, Bill, just for the record, since you brought that up, you could put that in section 7, other, which is seller's disclosures. But yeah,
Just gonna say, how about a disclosure of interest?
yeah. And, we do have an addendum for that. So you could check other and write in the name of the other addendum. That is perfectly acceptable. The other one that I wanted to cover, and it's going to dovetail with what we're talking about here in section 14 in a second. One of the other things that I run into pretty regularly with agents and deals, and where it gets a little sideways, it's like, listen, on the MLS, it said X is included. Or quite often this happens when something that was on the property, when you get to the final walkthrough, oh, I don't know, the jacuzzi's gone. And is that attached? Is it not attached? How do you handle a jacuzzi, by the way, if it's not specified on the MLS?
Don't you put it in the included items?
I know. It sounds so simple, doesn't it, Bill? Just put it in the included items. Guess what happens a lot of times? They don't include it. And they're like, well, it's attached. Why put yourself through the brain damage of even having to debate that? If there's something significant. So if I'm sitting with a buyer, I'm going to give them a copy of the printout of the MLS, and I'm going to direct their attention to the included sections. And I'm like, we will transfer everything that's in that included section into the included section of the REPC. Is there anything else as you walked through that you felt was important? I don't know, play set in the backyard, a shed that was not attached to the property, not on a foundation. I'm trying to think of in the ground trampoline. I'm trying to think of all the ones that I've run across over the years. If there's any doubt, well, freaking write it in, right? You know how they came up with the word assume, right? They're like, yeah, when somebody's acting like an ass and it's between you and me, that's how we got to assume. So it's a very poignant word. Don't assume. take the extra effort to write it in. I mean, what does that take? 10 seconds to write it in the inclusions. And that, you certainly want to make sure you do that. The other thing, the reason I brought that up is if you don't want to write it all in and you want to make sure there's no ambiguity in other, you could put see Exhibit 1. What could Exhibit 1 be in that context? A copy of the listing? A printout of the listing?
Listings.
Yeah. Guess what all of a sudden became contractual, right? And here's why this is important. This is not a trivial thing, you guys. I'm going to go now down to Section 14. Think of what we were just talking about. Section 14 is a super powerful section that most agents and brokers, I don't know if they've ever read it, they don't pay attention to it or whatever, but they say the REPC together with its addenda and any attached exhibits. Oh, see the connection we just did there? If you wrote see Exhibit 1, it's like specifically called out that it becomes part of the contract. Right? What's the title of this section? Complete contract includes exhibits. Okay. Seller's disclosures. What about all of those things? They constitute the entire contract between the parties. Now, if we stop there, that's kind of cool, but it goes on with some clarifying language. And supersedes and replaces any and all what? Prior negotiations, representations, that includes what's in the MLS. So if you don't include it in there, I literally have lost track of how many times I've had to talk with other agents and other brokers saying, well, your client put it in the MLS. I'm like, yeah. So have you read Section 14? And like, doesn't matter. You guys had it on the, it's a bait and switch. I mean, I'm just sharing with you some of the terms and the craziness that I hear. And I'm generally a polite guy, so I let them run their little rant and get all worked up. Listen, I'm not trying to aggravate the situation here, but in contracts, words matter. So if you don't mind, would you mind looking at Section 14 with me? Right? And the second half is super, super important. Supersedes and replaces any and all prior negotiations, representations, including what's on the MLS, warranties, understandings, or contracts between the parties, whether verbal or otherwise. That is some pretty dang powerful contract definition and language, right? It's very hard when somebody reads this section to say, yeah, but it was in the MLS. Let me translate all of Section 14. Unless it's in the REPC and any addenda, it doesn't exist. And you agreed to it when you signed off on this REPC, right? Because the language here is super, super powerful. And then it goes on to further clarify the REPC cannot be changed except by written agreement of the parties. So the first third talks about this is what is the contract. Second one is here's everything it's not. Any prior agreements, negotiations, representations, it doesn't matter. It's not part of this contract. And then, oh, by the way, if you want to change what's in the contract, you got to do it in writing. Okay. So I know that should seem really straightforward, but I'm driving the point home today because your comprehension and understanding of this, coupled with presenting it well, don't be like, hey, are you an idiot? Have you never read Section 14? Do not use that language. Be polite and be like, hey, listen, in years past, I thought the same thing, but went through some training, and I think it'd be useful for us to navigate this if we both read Section 14 together. Right?
Hey,
and then just watch them on the other side kind of melt down. They're like, oh, crap. Yeah, go ahead, Haley.
I was just going to say, and maybe you're going to come to it, but I would think that that's good for a buyer side, but I would think you would issue a huge caution to a seller's agent to allow it, because there are so many things that are included in a listing on the MLS that are beyond inclusions. The year the house was built, the way it faces on a lot, whether there's a deck or a patio. You include that listing. Oh, I had the house the year wrong. There's opportunity for litigation. Well, it didn't really have the patio. I checked it wrong, or a porch, or things that you can't just change. I think it's a huge risk to the seller. and it's way beyond the inclusions. I think it's great for a buyer to try to lock it down and to create a whole bunch of leverage. But as a seller's agent, I would never allow that to be part of the REPC.
That's because you're a savvy veteran. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. On the buyer side, very good play, gives you leverage. On the seller side, much like you, I would say, hey, this isn't to my seller. This isn't my first time around the block. Unless we're like 100% ironclad on everything that's in the listing, maybe what we ought to do is allow me to reach out to the other side and be like, we don't want to accept that as part of the contract, but let's talk through, much to Parker's point, let's ask some questions. What are the important things, right? We're not going to just say something all encompassing because that creates some potential risk. What are the things that are important to your buyers? Let's see if we can get those into an addendum specifically, and we'll see about signing that. So very good point. Thank you. All right. Got 15 minutes. So we talked about section 16, and I don't know. I'm going to put this as a word of caution. And I'm not in my ivory tower with this. I'm human just like anybody else. And sometimes we deal with obstinate people on the other side. Sometimes you get the trifecta of entrenched, obstinate, and ignorant. And it's very easy to allow yourself to be drawn into the emotion of a situation, be like, yeah, well, and come firing back. And you know what? In our minds, it feels good and in the moment. And yet, if we were to take a step back and say, what is the end goal here, right? Clearly, we've got to deal with some issues, but what is the end goal? I hope the first one is, I care about my clients and I want to do what's best for them. So I need to check my ego, my personal feelings at the door as much as possible, right? And be Switzerland, right? The neutral party. Yeah, we're not going to be part of World War II. We're neutral. Really, that needs to be our starting point. The second one is, how many of you have ever been involved in litigation in real estate? I want to see your hands. Or threatened litigation. Yeah. How does that make you feel? I mean, what does it do to your adrenaline?
Nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Fear, anxiety, stress.
So
go ahead, Parker.
This is proof of why I could never be a broker, because when it was even threatened, I was up for like 5 days, like, oh God, what did I do?
Yeah. Yeah. And yet it's, and I'm glad you shared that, Parker, because that's usually most people's experience, right? It's like everybody gets their flex on until it gets real, right? Like, we're going to sue you, or, you know, go ahead and sue us. And it's like, yeah, anytime I hear those things, my reaction internally is, clearly you've never litigated anything. You know, if you ever want this experience, if you get the opportunity to ask a litigating attorney, not just any attorney, but a litigating attorney, how should we approach something? You're going to get a pretty consistent answer. The real magic is never going to court in the first place. That's coming from an attorney, right? A guy that gets billable hours. There's a lot of work that goes into it when you have to litigate. They still get paid, but it wreaks havoc on their life as well. And you as a client, or you as the agent and your client, probably have never experienced it. You don't, you know, all of a sudden you get a demand letter, and next thing you know, you get the actual serving of a lawsuit that you've been named in, and then you get notice for depositions. And in case you've never done that, you know, it's like you're going to sit in a room with attorneys, and you're going to basically have a pre-trial trial, and they're going to ask you all the questions. And, oh, by the way, if any of the parties run into a hiccup, I mean, we're going to meet on July 1st for depositions, and like June 28th or 29th, you get a notice after you've been stressed out for a month. And then they're like, yeah, unfortunately, we have some unforeseen circumstances. We're going to do August 1st. And you're like, oh, great. And then you go through another month of stress. And I'm not making this up, you guys. And then you get to August 1st and like, yep, another family emergency. We're pushing off till September 1st. And the amount of anxiety and stress is just, for most people, it's not very tolerable. There's a few weird people like, yeah, big deal, whatever. For most people, I'm not sleeping well, I'm stressed out about this. And I paint that picture so that you can feel a little bit of the emotion. And hopefully when you feel those urges to be like, I'm going to tell my client, yeah, let's just sue them. Let's just do this. Pull yourself back from the edge and be like, do I like my life? Do I like to sleep well at night? Do I want to channel that energy into productive things? Talk yourself through that, and hopefully talk to your client through that. I mean, listen, I'm not talking about surrendering, but that should be our last resort. Let's see what we can do to resolve the issue. We won't give away the farm, but maybe we negotiate a little bit so that we don't get into a situation of litigation. I didn't really plan going into that little diatribe, but it's so crucial for our business. And here's what's in it for you, right? Even when you're in the right, even when you're right and in the right, if your client ends up being sued or having to sue because you didn't bring a voice of sanity, I can almost guarantee you've lost your client for life, even if you're right. Because you, unfortunately, illogically, you come to represent pain in their life, and they will find a way to not deal with you anymore. Now, I'm not saying that's always, but I'm saying it's a high probability. So for your own sleep, for your own safety, for keeping your SOI in contact, make sure you can explain to people how it's probably not in their best interest to litigate. Are there a few instances where you have to and it makes sense? Sure. But most of them, it's because people are flexing. And you need to be the adult in the room as much as possible. So let's talk section 1617 real quick, and then we'll be done. Default, super important. There's two sections. There's large overlap between them. So if the buyer defaults, they don't close, right? Let's start with this. If the buyer doesn't settle by the settlement deadline, is the contract dead? I see some mild head shaking no, but nobody wants to commit.
It could be, but not
Isn't
always.
It lives for a reasonable period of time.
Oh, Savannah, you and I have hung out for a while. Yeah, there's Utah case law that went to the Supreme Court, and it was based on real estate. It wasn't some other weird contract. The conclusion of the Supreme Court, the opinion was, no. It's like any other deadline. It's like, if you miss your financing and appraisal deadline and don't cancel, is the deal dead? No. If you miss seller's disclosures, is the deal dead? No. Has a breach happened? Yes. And until the non-breaching party acts on the breach and demands remedy, meaning section 16, then the contract lives. And like Savannah said in that court case, for a reasonable period of time. Don't you love it when they write words like that? What's a reasonable period of time? Depends on the situation. Yeah. Reasonable period of time in that court case, I believe, was 5 weeks. So it lives not for 5 hours, not for 5 days. We know it lives for at least 5 weeks because that was considered reasonable in that case, but it could be longer. It's going to depend on the situation. So this is it. Go ahead, Daryl.
I just have a question as a remedy to that.
Yep.
Let's say it's something simple like the guy's funds didn't come from his retirement account in time and he's 2 days late. What is required to continue through the closing process and remedy the breach?
Yeah. So let's go up real quickly here. This is why I like interactive ones. So closing, right? Settlement, notice there are two different sections. Settlement is everybody has signed and you provide everything, including the funds, except for the proceeds of a loan. So everything else is to be delivered. Okay. Closing is different, right? Closing means what? A, settlement's been completed. So section 3.1. B, the proceeds of the loan, the missing money has shown up, right? And it's been delivered to the escrow company. C, the applicable closing documents have been recorded at the county, also known as recording, right? And how long do you have after settlement 4 calendar days. So if you signed on Friday, you have until Tuesday at 5 o'clock to make sure it's funded and recorded. So if the money doesn't show up, I've had agents say that, oh my gosh, well, we didn't have the money at settlement, blah, blah, blah. The loan didn't come through, wasn't ready on the day of settlement. You don't have to. You've got 4 days. But if you go beyond that, then yes, we need to addend the contract where both parties agree that settlement and or closing, maybe it's just closing to be extended for 2 more days or 4 more days to get the funds there. That's a very easy addendum to the contract, other than who has to see it again. If there's a loan,
lender,
underwriting. Now, most underwriters aren't going to have any grief with that because the financial terms haven't changed, or they may have to recalculate a little bit of interest or whatever the case may be, but it's pretty straightforward.
But in cases where you have multiple offers and you got one in the wings as a backup that's a lot higher than the one you're closing and you happen to be a little late, can you cure the default without the agreement of the seller?
No.
So it is dead if the seller wants it to be dead.
If the seller wants to be dead, so let's say settlement was 5 o'clock on Friday or Thursday, 5 o'clock on Thursday, you signed at 9:01 on Friday. A breach has occurred and the seller is totally within their rights to turn around and say, seller's notice of cancellation, and we are going to take option A in section 16, your earnest money. Right?
Is that only applicable though if they didn't come in with the rest of the funds on Thursday?
Sure, it's part of the contract.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something that if I am correct, you can let me continue, Matt. But I learned this about 1.5 years into being a buyer's agent, and I wish I would have learned it sooner. But I get there's a lot to learn. But I always now make sure that my buyers have wired the information over prior to signing, if at all possible, because I've heard of situations where the seller at 5:05 says, hey, have your buyers wired the money over? You may have signed, but have they wired the money over? And the buyer's agent said no, and the seller said, well, we're canceling the contract because you have not fulfilled the terms and conditions of the contract. And
I want to make sure
back out.
I want to make sure we're clear on this, right? So section 1 settlement, since you brought this up, and I'm glad you brought it up, right? Settlement is everybody has signed, right? They've delivered all the applicable information, and let's read this, any section B. Any monies required to be paid by the buyer or seller under these documents, what? Except for the loan.
Right. Yeah, the loan officer has time to be able to do it, but the buyer has to send those monies in before that settlement deadline.
Yeah, because isn't it the title company that has the 4 days?
They have, remember this, they are the unbiased third party. They don't have a horse in the race. But I want to make sure we're clear on this. If I have $250,000 in a loan, I do not have to have those funds to the title company until 4 calendar days. But if I said, so for instance, in section 2, where it talks about our down payment, $50,000 or $100,000 and earnest money, all those things, you're right, Josh, those have to be delivered to the title company. If not, there's a breach in the contract and the seller absolutely can cancel, right? And this is where, I mean, you guys are a good group. I promise you, a good chunk of your peers have never read through this. They don't actually question this. They just kind of like, well, title company's handling it. And then they get shocked when somebody who knows the contract cancels and their client has the remedy and your client loses their earnest money and stuff like that. So these really are super crucial. Let's go back really quickly. I want to make sure we get
Hey,
through.
Matt, before you move on, that is a real gotcha in today's world, because with the fraud, a lot of agents are waiting until they sign at settlement to get wire instructions, and then they go off to their bank. They need to understand they got to get that done before that deadline.
You know what? You're 100% right. I would say the vast majority of our peers don't know this condition, but I've had it happen. And all it takes is once where you end up with egg on your face and your client is pissed, and guess who's not in your SOI anymore? Because you, and not only that, you potentially have liability there because you didn't inform them. And that is your fiduciary of reasonable care. Your job isn't to be an attorney, but you do need to have a cursory level knowledge of the instruments that you're having your clients use in the contract. Does that make sense? If somebody gets sideways enough, and they can create, remember this, in civil litigation, there have to be damages. That's the pillar number 1 of 2. And the second one is you have to be liable. And if you didn't do your fiduciary, what's the translation for fiduciary? Legal responsibilities. You didn't do your legal responsibility of reasonable care. And let me just tell you how this plays in court, right? If somebody can make the case that yes, there were damages and you were at least partial liable, they have this thing called comparative liability. You don't have to be 100% responsible. You only have to have part of the liability, and you can still be sued for money. And so the way this gets played in court is, you know what, we signed up and Josh was going to be paid $30,000 on this transaction if he'd just done his job. That's a crap ton of money. And he didn't do his job, and now we've been harmed. And we've lost out on a house, and we had to settle for something less, or there's a higher interest rate, or 10 other things they could use to constitute damages, liability, with the liability. You could find yourself sideways. Is it probably going to happen? Probably not. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. So these are very good things to cover. All right. So section 16, the defaults, they're very similar. So on the buyer, what are the options? You can cancel the REPC and they can get, if the buyer defaults and the earnest money goes to the seller as pre-agreed upon liquidated damages. That's always the easy one. And I can't tell you how many times I've had other agents and brokers who are the defaulting party saying, well, we're just going to give back the earnest money. Like, not your choice. We get to choose whether we will take that, or if we're going to sue for performance, or if we're going to pursue other remedies and other damages available at law. Right? This could be a big money thing. And then the seller default, much the same. If the buyer has defaulted, they can agree to take the buyer's earnest money, or they can sue for performance, or they can pursue other remedies available at law, except for if somebody cancels based on financing, right? Because in that section, section 8.3, it says, and the seller's agreeing in that section, that the only remedy they get if it's based on financing is they get their earnest money, right? Because the courts have basically said, if they can't get financing, don't want to get financing, we can't force them to get financing. It's going to be very hard for us to enforce this in court. So we're going to say you only get to pursue earnest money. All right. Now, I said when you talk about section 16, you definitely want to talk hand in hand about section 17. Because, sometimes people are cavalier, like, big deal, it's $2,000 earnest money. One of the hardest things for me to hear is when I call my agents, or they call me sometimes on the weekend, and something's going sideways, and they say, what do we do here? I'm like, well, how much earnest money? And it's like a $500,000 house or $600,000 house, and they're like, I got $1,000 earnest money. It's like, yeah, there's not much stick there. Not much stick there. So just a reminder, make sure there's decent earnest money. Now, other end of the spectrum is we've had people put $100,000, $200,000 earnest money on. That makes me nervous too, because if you get anything wrong, it can go sideways. So if you're going to go big on the earnest money, let's have a conversation, or have a conversation with one of your brokers. Somewhere in between, $5,000, $10,000 earnest money. If somebody's being cavalier and being like, we're not too worried about losing our earnest money. It's like, well, listen, I'm not trying to make a bigger deal out of this. Parker, you're my nemesis on the other side. I'm not trying to make a big deal, and I definitely need to consult with my clients, but one of the things I will be reminding them of when we talk about remedies available to us in section 16 is, you guys clearly are defaulting. We have the option to pursue any of these remedies, and if we do pursue B or C, section 17 comes into play. And that can be almost more expensive than the remedy itself, which is, in the event of litigation or binding arbitration, arising out of the transaction, the prevailing party shall be entitled to what? Costs and reasonable attorney fees. Anybody employed an attorney lately? What's their billable hours usually? Somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 an hour is kind of the minimum, an hour. And just to sit down and consult with them and have them review the file, you're probably looking, 3-4 hours. And then if you start filing, what's the limit on small claims? How high can you go on small claims currently?
Is it 15,000?
I don't know. Somebody Google it.
I couldn't remember. I can't remember. Well, sorry, you mean the cost to make the claim, or
how much can you claim up to?
It's $20,000.
20,000. Okay.
Wow, when did that change? I thought we were still at 15, but
nope. It's on Google AI. It says $20,000 in Utah.
As of January 1st.
As of January 1st. There you go.
Josh, you're one of those guys who trust Google, huh?
Okay, so and by the way, I literally was personally at a small claims one where the client came in, and at the time that it was $11,000, and she said her damages were $13,000. What did the judge do? Said, sorry, get out of my court. He didn't really say it that way, but he said, sorry, I don't have domain over this. You need to go file in district court. And he dismissed the case because it was over the limit.
Hey, Matt,
He didn't
section
say, hey,
15.
do you want to modify that? Do you want to change that? That's not the judge's prerogative. It's like the case as presented to the court falls outside the jurisdiction, so you got to go away. Go ahead, Josh.
Section 15. How do you want us to mark it? As our broker, I maybe have missed this in your prior conversation.
Let me finish 17 and I'll hop to 15. So just make sure when you talk damages, it would go something like this, Josh. Josh, I'm sorry this thing's going sideways. I think we should do everything in our power to try and keep this on track, because my people aren't going to be terribly unhappy. And where you're the defaulting party, I'm not sure they'll just take earnest money. They may pursue specific enforcement or other damages, and they're probably going to prevail. And again, not to rub salt in the wound, but that means Section 17 is coming into place. So when we add up the numbers, is this really worth $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to your client? Or should we see if there's a way for us to salvage it? Some version of that conversation is what we should be working on. To your point about mediation, here's my feeling on this. There's not a right or wrong answer. A few people have chastised me because over the years, I have told people, you should really be checking may at the option of the parties instead of shall. Here's the rationale. And again, I'm not going to have you change it either way. It's really your client's choice. But if I'm sitting down with a client and saying, hey, I hope this never comes into play, that we have to get to mediation. But if we do, here's my personal opinion on this based on 20 plus years of experience. If we check shall, that means we have a contractual obligation if things go sideways to call a mediator, pay for a mediator. And I literally have had, I'm not joking when I say this, I've had the opportunity to go into a mediation with my client and the other side, and the other client says, we think you guys are a bunch of a-holes, blah, 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 and F you. And they walked out. Did they jump the hurdle of shall attend mediation? They sure did. They sure did. And not only that, my client has to pay a part of that. So mediation works when both parties want to attend it and want to get a third party involved that says what is reasonable and fair, because we're emotionally entrenched, and you as a mediator should be able to parse through the contract and the terms and tell us what is reasonable and fair. So I personally prefer may, because I don't want my clients to have to spend $500 unless it's going to be fruitful. But other people are like, well, we want to force their hand. We want to show that we, in our contract, said shall, therefore we were trying mediation, and that shows a good effort on our part and it was reasonable, blah, blah, blah. So I can see both sides of the coin, but my personal opinion is if I'm representing somebody, I'm going to encourage them to check may. Okay? All right, we have completed our hour. I hope, like I said, I started off with those are some loosely connected sections of the REPC, but they're ones that come up over and over again. And even though we now know more of the technicalities of what the language says and what it means for our clients, I hope we finish on this note. You're the pro. You should be pro at tamping down the emotions. You should be pro at communicating. You should be pro at knowing what the section says and have the ability to inform the other side, who sometimes is in their ignorance, without being offensive. Because as soon as people feel offended, they start digging in their heels, and then you're swimming upriver. It's a tough go. So I share all those things with you guys. I know you know a lot of them, but it's a good reminder that this is what separates the good and great agents from the not so good. And you'll know you're dealing with a not so good one when they go really quick to the emotion, where they, well, we're gonna, right? And even with that, if you're dealing with them, be the pro that says, hey, listen, I don't want this to get all charged up, and I can feel the passion in your voice. I really want you to be paid for the work that you've done. I want to be paid, but more than that, our clients deserve to get this deal done. Can we just table the emotion for a minute? I'm hearing you. I want you to know I hear that you're charged up about this. You don't need to keep, showing me over and over again that you're charged up. I'm really interested in the solutions. Do you mind if I ask a few questions? Right? We should be the ones that can do that and do it deftly, that could do it to where people are like, all right, I can calm down. Yeah, let's see if we can get this deal on track. That's my hope for you guys. And I really do appreciate you being on the call today. Hope you have a great day and a great week.
Thank you.
Matt,
Thank
stick
you.
around for one
Bye.
second, Matt.